seeing is not believing, but what we discovered is that believing is actually seeing, because what we believe has the power to change what we see. Yeah. And so once wonder was awakened and I saw magic, I started believing in magic again, which means I started seeing it everywhere again.
My name is Alex Lewis, and you're listening to Words Matter, a podcast by Car Window Poetry. Every other Thursday, we invite you to hear from someone who's using words to make the world a better place. Today, I'm chatting with storyteller and illusionist Harris III. He's also the curator and creative leader of Story, a community of artists, makers, and creators who believe in the power of stories. I'm really excited for you to hear Harris's story, so without further ado, let's jump into it. Here's my conversation with Harris III. All right. I am here with my friend Harris III. Harris, welcome to the show, man.
Appreciate you having me. Harris III is such a weird name. So when I hear other people say, it's like, sorry, my name is so weird.
It's good. I'm actually a third as well.
And Are you really? Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So you don't get to see it too much, so it's always fun.
No, and kids these days don't understand it. Like if I go speak at a school assembly or something like that, or a middle school especially, kids come up and they're like, is your dad a king? Are you royalty? And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like that. The only reference they have of like someone with Roman numerals after their name is like King
George or something. I love it. Well, for people who may be, just hearing from you for the first time or getting a glimpse into your life, who are you?
Man, that is a great question. I think like so many other human beings, especially who dabble in creative endeavors, I think they always struggle with trying to find a way to explain to people who they are. Mm-hmm. I think first and foremost, I am a human being. My greatest challenge is to be a human being and not a human doing, because I'm also a doer, an entrepreneur. I'm also a father and a husband and a friend. And so I try to take all the ways that I am doing my best to be a human being and put those before in priority to my vocation and how people would say who I am. I'm also a 3, a very stereotypical 3 on the Enneagram, which means that I struggle to be loved for who I am instead of about what I do. Yeah. So, in interviews like this, when people are like, so who are you? My natural tendency is to be like, well, I do magic tricks and I run a conference called Story and I travel around the world and speak and perform and I produce film and television, and you focus on all the things that sound really cool. Yeah. But at the end of the day, man, I'm just a human trying to live a good life and do that in relationship and community with other human beings.
That's it. And I love how you answered that. And I'm actually a 3 as well. And so I wholeheartedly understand that struggle, and was actually sitting with my counselor yesterday and just like mulling through that of, this constant wrestling between what you do, who you are, not letting what you do become the identifier, but more so really getting to the heart of who you are. And so I'm always happy when people answer that question in that way. So just a hint for future guests. But, so Harris, I know this may come as surprising to you, but you're actually the first illusionist I've spoken to on the podcast this season.
And definitely not a surprise. There are not very many of us at all.
Well, you said that you perform magic tricks, and I find it interesting that even as I was doing research for this episode, you don't necessarily call yourself a magician. And I was interested, why is that? Kind of what do you see as the difference between the two?
Yeah, it started out as this really silly accident. When I was a kid, I grew up in the Bible Belt, and some of my first performances as a kid were in church buildings. And because of that, in the small town I grew up in, everyone was scared of the word magic. They're like, you can't call him a magician, is what everyone told my parents, because otherwise everyone's going to think it's like witchcraft or dark arts or something, which is so silly. Yeah. But now at the age of 34, I actually, if I had a chance to go back and think through it all, I would do it the same way all over again, just for different reasons. And that is, I don't know that what I do is magic. And I'm not scared of that word. I'm not like a weird, let's not call it that. I don't want people to get confused. At the end of the day, it's what people know me as. They look at what I do on stage and they refer to it as magic. But that's really not what it is. They're tricks and they are illusions. And if anything, I think that what I do and what other people like me do, owning the word magic, maybe belittles what real magic is. And magic is not something that you can see. That's what we think it is. Like, oh, look, a magician pulled a rabbit out of a hat or cut somebody in half or found my card. Did you see that magic he performed? Magic is not something that you see. Magic is that thing that you felt when you watched him cut that lady in half or pull the rabbit out of the hat or find your card. And so what is that? What is that thing that you feel? And I think it's most closely described by just childlike wonder. Like when people watch a really great magic trick, the most common reaction out of 9 out of 10 people is laughter. It's ridiculous laughter. They start giggling like a little kid. And that's because they felt magic. And so I like calling what I do an illusion, which ironically, watching an illusion can make somebody feel magic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So these days, that's why I've stuck with the words. I like just calling what I do illusions, and my vocation is as an illusionist. But like in no way am I offended when people call me a magician. And even I call myself a magician who performs magic tricks sometimes. It's really semantics, I think.
Yeah. And you do this just from following you over the past year. I think you do this really cool thing on your social media channels where you talk about this idea of real magic that you kind of referenced before. But for you, what has that come to embody, even as you go into that message of childlike wonder? Where are the places where you find yourself most seeing real magic?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really looking for it. When I was 30 years old, I was at the height of my cynicism. And I think it's because I was at the height of my career as an illusionist at the time. You know, I traveled around the world. Ironically, the thing that took me around the world to see the wonders of the world was my ability to make other people wonder, right? And the irony of like, wow, there's somebody who makes someone wonder. And then I got to experience the wonders of the world. But then somewhere along the way, it all gave birth to cynicism, and I lost my own capacity to wonder. Or maybe I still had the capacity to wonder, but yet for some reason that had been shut down and wonder had died. And I think I'd forgotten why I do magic. And I think a lot of it was birthed out of that been there, done that attitude. You know, I was blessed with the opportunity to travel to almost 40 countries before turning 30 years old. And I'd performed for like 2 million people on 5 different continents. And when you've walked the Great Wall of China and stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon and Niagara Falls and seen the Taj Mahal, and like take the pyramids, for example, I've seen the pyramids 3 times in Egypt on tours in the Middle East. And the first time I saw the pyramids, it is obvious why it is considered a wonder of the world, because it is awe-inspiring and it leaves you in wonder. You're like, that is insane. Like and then the second time you see the pyramids, it's a little bit of that newness has worn off a little bit. And so you're just like, they really are amazing, aren't they? But it's not that childlike wonder that you feel the first time you're exposed to them. And it's more or less about like, wow, and more about like, I wonder how they did it. And then the third time I saw the pyramids, I was just like, oh yeah, let's take the guy, like the people touring with me at the time, they hadn't seen them. It'll be fun to take them and show them. But to me, they were like just the pyramids. And like, it's ludicrous for me to be like just the pyramids when the overwhelming majority of Americans will never in their lifetime have a chance to experience all of the wonders of the world like I have. And so I think there was so much cynicism in my life and apathy as a result of a whole combination of things, partly of which has been there, done that attitude, that I'd lost my wonder and forgotten why I did magic. And the catalyst was I'd made this stupid mistake. I was at this 4th of July event doing a fire breathing act where you like breathe fire and you stick torches in your mouth and eat fire. And I just made this really dumb, stupid mistake. My pride got in the way. Pride came before the fall, as they say. And the mistake led to me setting my face on fire for about 8 seconds. And I had like 2nd-degree burns all over my face and neck. I put a picture up sometimes when I'm speaking, when I tell the story. It's pretty gnarly. And that led to a couple of weeks of no shows and me healing up. And I remember laying on my couch, and around the same time, I had just become a dad, and my son Jude was 6 months old. So I'm laying on the couch healing up from my burns, watching my little kid roll around on the floor, trying to learn how to crawl. And like his eyes were wide awake to magic everywhere. And so imagine watching this little kid who sees magic everywhere. He's seeing the world through this new lens because he was just recently born. And I don't really believe in magic anymore because my wonder had died. And then I'm asking myself, why do you do this crap? Like, why do you blow fire out of your mouth? Why do you jump in tanks of water wearing straight jackets? Like, why do you walk across burning hot coals and shards of glass barefoot? Like, why do you do all this stupid stuff?
Yeah.
And then I'd forgotten the look on my parents' faces when I was 9 years old, when I did my very first trick for my mom and dad, and their eyes lit up in wonder. I'd forgotten that and lost it along the way. Wow. And so basically the easiest way to explain it is that before my cynicism robbed my kids of the wonder that is in and through everything in the world around them and in themselves, me becoming a dad reawakened wonder in my life and really reminded me why I do magic. And that's when I started seeing magic everywhere. Because if you don't believe in magic, you'll never find it. We live for the most part under this assumption that seeing is believing. That's like a statement that we've coined. Seeing is believing, which sometimes is true, but not always. Magicians and what they do on stage proves that seeing is not always believing. Like, thing is not actually levitating. We don't have the power to make something levitate, even though from your perspective, it looks like it is. So seeing is not believing. But what we've discovered is that believing is actually seeing, because what we believe has the power to change what we see. Yeah. And so once wonder was awakened and I saw magic, I started believing in magic again, which means I started seeing it everywhere again.
I love that. I love the way that you broke that down, of kind of originally having this experience of wow, which transitioned into how, and then became And, ultimately you kind of, through being able to witness magic again through your son's eyes, you got back to that place of wow, which I think is extremely powerful.
Yeah. Well, then you start seeing it everywhere else, right? Like when you start believing in it again, you're like, oh, wow. You realize it's right in front of your face everywhere you look. And the only reason why other people aren't seeing it is because they don't believe in it. So they have to learn to believe in magic again. And the way to do that is to reawaken those childlike character traits of wonder and awe and curiosity and imagination.
Wow. And so when you were 9 and you're performing magic for your parents, would you say that was kind of the first time that you realized the power of illusion?
Yeah, it was in that moment for the most part. Basically, I had been, up until the age of 9, been bullied and picked on at school and was not one of the cool kids and really wasn't good at much of anything. I was obsessed with baseball at the time, but I sucked at baseball. I didn't get to play on an actual baseball team for multiple reasons, but one of which was I wasn't really very good at it. And so imagine 9 years of, I guess not 9 full years, but I guess maybe 4 years of bullying and not being the cool kid. Yeah. And then all of a sudden someone else is looking at you with wonder and awe in response to something that you just did. Yeah. And that's the moment that I think wonder was awakened in me again. I think wonder is like this switch. So it's like a light switch on the wall, and we're all born with that switch turned on. That's why my son at 6 months old was able to awaken wonder in me. His wonder switch was on because he was born with wonder. Yeah. And then what happens is somewhere along the way, most of us in our childhood, somehow that switch gets flipped off. It could be a father wound. It could be a bully on a playground at school. It could be a teacher who didn't believe in us and shut down possibility. Whatever that first wound is, that switch gets flipped off. And so I think I was born with this wonder switch turned on. And then early in my childhood, because of getting bullied and picked on, the power of other people's words shut down wonder and switched that switch off. Yeah. And then I think what happened is I made it to 9, was cynical, wasn't using my imagination to dream. I was using my imagination to worry. And then my parents awakened wonder in me because of the response to that magic trick I did. And then instantly that little wonder switch was turned back on again. And then it stayed on for years until my mid-teenage years. And then it got switched off again. And then I had to switch it back on again. Yeah. And then it got switched off again. And then, every time I got burned and stopped believing in magic, that wonder switch died. Yeah. And then when I was 30 and became a dad, that's when it got switched back on. And now that I understand that switch exists, now I'm doing everything in my power to keep it turned on. Right. Yeah. Because when that switch is turned on, it changes everything else that you see in your life. When that wonder switch is flipped on, it changes your relationships, it changes your work, changes your dreams, it changes how you use your imagination, changes my relationship with my wife, my ability to father my kids, everything. There's not a single part of my life that isn't touched by whether wonder is awake or not. So yeah, that moment with my parents was that was one of the times in my life they're just by their reaction, it's like they walked over to the wall and just flipped that switch back on for me, and instantly it gave birth to a bunch of possibility.
It's so good. And I really appreciate how you explain that, words, they do have this power. They can ultimately be one of those things that help sustain that light switch, if you will, but it also has the power to turn it off. And so for you, you've kind of made this transition, and I wouldn't even say a transition, but in the midst of performing magic, you've also started leading this community called Story, where I definitely see the power of words and the power of storytelling. And so what is Story, and how did you step in to that role? Kind of what was appealing about leading this community for you?
Yeah. Story is kind of an uncommon creative community that consists of a lot of different people. There's a lot of artists, and there's a lot of people in our community who would not consider themselves artists, but they're a part of our community because we believe that everyone is innately creative. And so it is a community that's focused on the creative power of storytellers. And most of them work in a creative industry, not all of them. But the thing that no matter what they do vocationally or what medium they work in, the thing that everyone in our community understands and believes in is the power that stories have. Mm. It's been said that if you want to understand a culture, that you listen to the stories of that culture. And that means if you want to change that culture, you change the stories that are being told. Martin Luther King Jr. was a storyteller. A lot of people don't think of him as a storyteller first, like I do. They think of him as an activist or a reverend or a public speaker. But when he stepped up to a microphone to give a speech, like I Have a Dream, for example, that was him going, hey, I'm going to tell you a story about a world that doesn't exist yet. But if I can get you to buy in and believe that that story might be possible, and then if I extend my hand and invite you into that story will go from imagination to reality. One of my favorite lines in all of cinema is a line from Walt Disney's character in Saving Mr. Banks, where he said, that's what we storytellers do. We restore order with imagination. We instill hope again and again and again. And what I love about that is it is empowering to storytellers, because he's saying, hey, what storytellers do when things are broken, and it doesn't take much looking around the world today. Spend 5 minutes on Twitter and you will realize the world seems very broken. Yeah. But storytellers have the opportunity to restore order where things are broken. The way we do that is with imagination. The way to help people imagine what could be is by offering them a story, offering them a better narrative, and then inviting them into that story, which gives them hope again and again and again. And so that's also what was appealing to me about leading the Story community was, I was traveling around the world speaking to maybe about 100,000 people a year, which is a lot of people as a communicator. It's not that much if you compare that amount of influence to the influence of whoever, Justin Bieber or Lady Gaga or Justin Timberlake, who are in front of that number of people in 1 or 2 days at a music festival or an arena tour. But for me, I was going like, that's somewhat significant. I get a chance to potentially inspire up to 100,000 people a year. But once I started realizing the power that storytellers have, it was like, okay, what if I wasn't just a storyteller? What if I also devoted this next season of my life to inspiring other storytellers? And then next thing you know, we had companies like Disney and Pinterest and IBM and Intel and the copywriters who write ads for Victoria's Secret and grocery store chains and Chick-fil-A. And so all these different sectors of business alongside all these different denominations of churches, alongside all these different schools and public schools and private schools and universities, they were all coming together to have conversations about how do we tell a better story. And that got really exciting to me because I feel like now I'm in a season where I can actually influence culture, go to bed at night 10 years from now going, I think we may not have changed the whole world, but I feel like we're changing the world. Because if you can change the stories, you can change the culture. That's what Story is all about. And there's a lot of people that are part of our community who just want to be a better storyteller for commercial reasons. And that's okay too. We have nothing against those people, and it's okay if they want to learn from us to be a better storyteller for that purpose. But ultimately that's while you're learning to be a better commercial storyteller so you can do a better job at whatever your vocation is. We also want to inspire you and call you to action to understand the power of the stories that you're telling have.
Yeah. And so how long was it? How long back has it been since you stepped into that role of leading story?
Yeah, I started leading story in January of 2016, I believe. So Story was, as a conference, was originally started and founded by my friend Ben Arment. And Ben's an incredible guy who kind of fostered the original vision and launch of this community. And then kind of around 2014, kind of feeling like he was ready to move on to something else and wanted to pass the baton to someone else, and called me up and said, "Hey, is this something that you'd be willing to take over?" And I agreed, and here we are.
Love it. And so in that little over a year, are there different moments that stick out in your mind that really speak to who the Story community is? Maybe it's a moment that happened at a Story conference, or conversation that you've had with someone, or an email that you guys have received. But are there a few different moments or experiences that you can look back at and say, this is who Story is?
Yeah, man. I don't know if there's a specific one that I want to name, because I don't want to name names out of respect to the people and the common experiences I've had with them. But repeatedly, generally there are already books that are written and in the world as a result of someone coming to our conference 2 years ago. There are films that are currently being made that would not be made if people weren't sitting in the room as Story. So there is stuff that is being put into the world. There are stories that are being told that all were sparked by sitting in a room for 2 days with the rest of our community and dreaming about the power that those stories might have, and leaving with the intense desire to make those things. But I think maybe some of my favorite stories are examples of speakers from incredibly high profile companies who kind of come in not really sure who we are, what our community is about. And then I always refer to it as like this, where they like hold their fingers up in the air, and that's like they're trying to, it's like the universal sign for money, but they're not talking about money. They're trying to feel intangible thing that's in the air, and they put their fingers in the air and they rub them together, and it's like they're searching for words. They're like Harris, and there's like something, and they're searching and they can't find the words, and they're rubbing their fingers together. It's just like there's something intangible in the air. There's something special about what you're trying to build. And I just want you to know that you have so and so full support of anything that you want to do as Story in the future. And those experiences are humbling and amazing, but it reminds me that in all of the sleepless nights and the hard work and the financial risk and all the long hours that our team puts into these experiences, they're worth it, because there is something intangible and transcendent that is transformational for people because of those intangible things that they have a hard time describing. At the end of the day, I think it comes back to the beginning of our conversation. I think it's magic. What they're trying to describe is magic. They feel it, but they don't know what to call it and label it as. But the fact that it's in the air and they're feeling it and experiencing it, I think is what makes Story and all of our gatherings special.
Yeah, I love that. And I definitely, just through following along, feel a part of the Story community, and can definitely say that I don't know if something like this podcast or Car Window Poetry would exist if it wasn't for the encouragement that I've received from you guys. So I really just want to put that out there to say thank you so much for the work that you guys are doing and the magic that you're inspiring in so many communities across the world.
Yeah, man. Thank you. I think the biggest accomplishment of my life may not be my 20-year career as an illusionist, or the films or TV that I someday produce, or the books that I someday write. The biggest accomplishment might be space I held for other storytellers to get inspired to go make the stuff they're supposed to make and tell the stories that they were supposed to tell. And that is far more exciting of a legacy to me, because we can do so much more together, and the world needs us. The world needs storytellers to step into the stuff that we've been called to do. So props to you for following through.
Thanks, bro. So when you're putting together something like Annual Story Conference, you have to really be a creator or a curator of voices and perspectives. And so for you, what do you look for in curating those different voices?
That's a great question. I think there's the entire books probably that could be written on the art It's not a science. It's definitely an art. Otherwise everybody would be doing it. And I think this is why a lot of events and conferences that people go to, they don't have that experience of the people like putting their fingers in the air, trying to find the intangible words to describe what they just felt. And so it's sometimes hard to put into words. A friend of mine who used to work at Cirque du Soleil, she recently asked me that question. She's like, I felt it. What was it? What are the steps that you feel like you take to create that kind of experience? And I don't even know if I can describe it yet. What I do know is that I'm trying to create a certain atmosphere, and you have to find people that fit into that culture who don't disrupt that atmosphere. Because at the end of the day, what we're all interested in is inspiring people to take action.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things that I learned from good leaders is that our actions flow out of our attitudes. But a lot of people are producing events and writing books and giving talks to people in an effort to shift their actions or their attitudes so that actions will naturally flow out of that. And in the event world, I think that there's like an extra level that goes beyond attitudes and actions, and that's creating a certain atmosphere. And I think that's what we're trying to do at our events, is create a certain atmosphere, because when you take a bunch of human beings and put them in a certain atmosphere that has a culture to it, it actually shifts their attitudes naturally. Mm-hmm. And then the actions you want them to take are naturally going to flow out of that. Mm-hmm. So instead of thinking small and going, how do I get people to take this action through their experience at this event? I just try to create an atmosphere that shifts their attitudes so that they take the action on their own. And so I think, curating the right voices comes down to what type of atmosphere am I trying to create, and who are the people that fit into this culture. Mm. There's no room for ego in that kind of atmosphere. Yeah. Pride disrupts the atmosphere, which means that, I try to find voices that aren't going to contribute to that type of culture. Typically, there's not a lot of people that are part of like the speaking circuit, quote unquote, who get up on stage at Story. A lot of people who are on stage at Story have never given a talk before, which is like mind blowing, because people are like, you were the whatever chief creative something or creative director at this company or this agency, and you've never given a talk before. Yeah. And it's like, no, because they've been busy doing work and telling stories. And so getting up and talking about their creative process that's not something they've had time to do because they've been busy hustling and telling stories that need to be told. They've been so busy doing important work, they don't have time to go talk to people about how they do that important work. Mm. And so a lot of curating those voices comes down to me finding people that are doing important work in the world and convincing them that they should take the time to get up on stage and talk to their peers about how they tell stories. Yeah. So I don't know, man, it's a really hard thing to explain. If it were a science, I could break it down into like 5 easy action steps.
Formula. Yeah. Yeah. Well, no.
Yeah. It's just, I don't know that framework or formula exists.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
And people find us. That's what's great about it is it seems like every other week I get a phone call from someone, I don't mind saying this publicly, Don Hahn, who is the producer of Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. And, an animated film in Disney World, there's not like 45 producers like there are. Like when you go to the movie theater and it's just like produced by these 8 executive producers and then produced by these 12 associate producers. I mean, it was basically him. He was the guy that made sure Lion King and Beauty and the Beast, like those movies got made. And those are some of the biggest films in the last 30 to 40 years of filmmaking. And like, he would be a dream to have him come contribute to the story community. But I didn't go knocking on Don's door. Don reached out to us and said, hey, I heard about what you guys are doing and it sounds really special. I want to be a part of it. Wow. And so examples like that of Don, who are just genuinely good people who contribute, they already fit into the atmosphere and culture of story. So the fact that they're finding us and saying generously, I want to be a part of what you're doing, that makes my job easier than a lot of people perceive it to be. Yeah. But I can also hear my friends going, okay, you didn't have to do the work of reaching out to Don and asking him to be a part of it, but you did have to do the work to create that culture and to create that atmosphere that people are talking about so that people like Don would reach out and be like, hey, I want to be a part of what you guys are doing because it sounds special.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an outpouring of the heart. It's really great.
Yeah.
So Harris, we're going to dive into the final few questions. Okay. The first one is, what is giving you life right now? And this could be, I'm sure, a variety of different things, but what are a few of the things that you find are really making you feel alive right now?
Gosh, it's so much, man. My work, I'm fired up about, everything we've been talking about and what we're doing at Story. It just feels like there's so much momentum and there's so many people that are being inspired by what we're doing. And it's not just like short-lived inspiration. Like we got them all in the room for 2 days and we got them all motivated and then they leave and they don't do anything. Like people are leaving our gatherings and doing stuff and making stuff. And that is really meaningful and inspiring to me. And it's what makes me want to keep waking up in the morning and working as hard as I can to keep them inspired. So that's really meaningful to me and it's giving me a ton of life. Becoming a dad 4 years ago was obviously incredibly life-changing for me. And so now I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, 2-year-old daughter named Everly, a 4-year-old son named Jude. And between those two kiddos and my wife, Kate, man, I don't know if I could handle much more life than what they're giving me. So that's been really great. And then studying the Enneagram, realizing how much of a 3 I am and allowing my wife and my friends to love me for who I am and not for what I do.
Yeah.
That has been a huge part of, I think, my spiritual journey. And so that's been pretty life-giving to me.
Yeah. That's a full-time job.
My love language is words of affirmation.
Yeah.
So my wife's generosity with her affirmation and words of praise and encouragement is probably one of the greatest sources of life for me. So yeah, would be where I am without her.
I love that. Well, Harris, I'm sure after listening to this conversation, there are going to be a number of people who are saying, we want to know more about this guy and, the life he's living and continue to be inspired. So where can people go to follow along with you, your work, your life,
on Twitter and Instagram, I'm just at Harris III, which is the Roman numeral 3. So Harris III on socials. My website is the same, harristhe3rd.com. Everything we're building through Story is at storygatherings.com. All of the stuff about the Story community can be found at storygatherings.com. Our flagship event is our annual conference. It's a 2-day conference style gathering. It takes place in the fall. We're excited to go back to Nashville again this year. So you can, if you just want to go straight to learn more about the conference, that's story2018.com. If you want to learn more about Story 2018, but I'm not incredibly active on social media, but I do try to respond to all my messages on there at some point for those that have come in. So yeah, reach out online. I'm not hard to get a message to if anybody wants to connect.
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure that all those links and places to go are in the show notes for this episode. And Harris, thanks again, man. Appreciate having you on.
Yeah, dude. Hopefully see you sometime soon in person.
Today's episode is produced by me, Alex Lewis, and our awesome music was provided by Julius Tunstall. If you haven't yet gone to the Car Window Poetry Facebook page and checked out our new video, Bryson the Three-Legged Dog, definitely go check that out after this episode. It's a little story inspired by a 3rd grader I met during my first ever Car Window Poetry workshop. If you enjoyed today's episode, I encourage you to go to your Apple Podcast app and leave us a 5-star rating and review, as that's a big way more people can learn about the show and be impacted by these conversations. Until next time, you matter, you are enough. Remember these words when times get tough. Thanks for listening.